January is the biggest month for chargebacks. Don't let your holiday sales plummet. Start off Q1 of 2024 in the black with these chargeback prevention efforts you can implement right now.
Obviously, chargebacks can never be 100% prevented because there's always going to be customers who are unhappy or, some disputes and so forth. But it is a good idea to try to minimize them as much as possible. Even if you get to 0.5% of chargebacks or 0.3%, you have to also add on other costs to chargeback. It's not just losing the revenue of the sale. You're also getting charged a fee. There's also time to process the chargeback. For example, if you have company disputing chargebacks or you have somebody on your staff that's disputing chargebacks. So bottom line is chargebacks can cost you anywhere between 2 and 8% of your top line revenue before you start getting rid of some expenses. So, focusing on this area of business when your offer is dialed in and you're doing well, it's a good area because it could be, low-hanging fruit that could add some valuable dollars to your bottom line. There's a couple of things about chargebacks that are important to think about. There's chargeback prevention, and then there's chargeback mitigation after they've occurred. So we tend to focus a lot on the aftermath. Once a chargeback has occurred, what do we do? How do we get our money back and so forth? But if you do spend a little bit of time of understanding, how these chargebacks occur and why they occur and so forth, the proactive approach will obviously yield the best results revenue-wise, because regardless of whether you win the chargeback back or not, you will still get charged that chargeback fee, and it does count against your chargeback ratio. So if you get 20 chargebacks and you win back 10, your ratio is still counted upon the 20. So unfortunately, Visa and MasterCard do not give you any brownie points for winning chargebacks back. So it's important to try to prevent as many as possible. If you're working in a space like supplements or adult, or where you have naturally a higher chargeback curve, it's important to prevent them even more so, because you don't want to get into any of your banks or processors' radar. So think of a few tools and a few things that you can implement. And my approach is always start small, make little steps. You don't want to hurt your conversion. You don't want to have issues with your approval ratios and so forth. So pick a couple of tools, list them, create yourself an Excel spreadsheet of all the different things that you want to try or that you want to add to your shopping cart, and then test them out. And when you do test out new things for chargeback mitigation or chargeback prevention, it's important to give them a couple of weeks or even a month or so to see, their result and if they're working and so forth. An interesting step would be to use the fraud settings within your gateway. So your gateway, whether you're using NMI, authorized.net, or there's a whole bunch of them. Usually your gateway is agnostic to your processor, meaning you have your shopping cart connected to a gateway and the gateway is connected to the processor or your bank, whatever you prefer to call it. The gateway is the layer in between that just processes the transaction. Now, a lot of merchants don't know, but that gateway and many gateways have a lot of fraud settings already built in there that you can just configure for your business model and you can start using them. They would not prevent, sophisticated fraud or what we call friendly fraud, which is, basically a customer that just regrets a purchase, but it could prevent some obvious fraud. It could prevent, somebody going crazy and processing 10 or 15 cards, one after the other from the same IP. It could prevent somebody using the same card over and over again on a daily basis to buy, for example, to collect an affiliate commission. There's a lot of different fraud checks. So you can, put your AVS restrictions quite high, your CVV restrictions quite high, or somewhere in between. You could put maximum number of purchases per card number, per IP address. There's a lot of these different tools that are very interesting. And you just have to know what is your typical customer doing and then input those settings within the gateway. Also, a very interesting one that most gateways offer is maximum number of transactions per email address. So if somebody's trying to fraud you, just blatantly fraud you, a lot of times they have different cards, but they don't have too many email addresses. So, making maximum transactions per email and per card number will definitely, at least just take out some of the obvious fraud. And these tools are just in your gateway. So you might as well just use them, even if you use a couple of them. It's important and necessary to prevent the obvious fraud, because you cannot claim ignorance. For example, if somebody comes to your online store and just buys, a whole bunch of stuff and you didn't do any checks. Your processor will say, well, you're supposed to check. You're not supposed to let people buy with the same card 100 times the same product or whatever the case is. So this will just prevent, your obvious offenders. Moving along from the gateway, and some gateways offer 3D Secure. 3D Secure is an authentication. Basically, it's like 2FA for Gmail, but for credit cards. So it basically validates the card with something that the customer knows, whether it be a text message or some kind of other verification. This is now mandatory in Europe. So if you're selling to Europeans, or if you're a European merchant selling to Europeans, then you have to use 3D Secure, which means your customers are getting an extra validation step on your shopping cart. If you are suffering from high chargebacks or high losses because of chargebacks and refunds and so forth, adding 3D Secure to maybe a portion of your traffic, or if let's say you're in the US and you're seeing that you're getting a lot of chargebacks that are from non-US customers, well, maybe you want to use 3D Secure for non-US purchases. So using these settings and using these different types of tools, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing solution. You could decide that 3D Secure will be applicable to all transactions that come from a specific region or a country or a traffic source. So it could be used very intelligently to just mitigate some of your risk. One popular tool that a lot of merchants in the online space and specifically in high risk use is Ethica and CDRN. Some people call it Verify. These are alerts. So essentially what happens is it is a period of time where you get an alert that somebody is thinking that the transaction that they did with you is suspicious or is asking questions about the transaction, and you can make a judgment call to refund that transaction instead of taking the potential loss of the chargeback. So a lot of merchants use these. There are some false positives. There are times that you're going to refund somebody and it wouldn't have ended up in a chargeback. You wouldn't be able to predict that. But if you're in a situation where you have high chargebacks, you risk losing your merchant account or having some issues with your business, then definitely, Ethica and CDRN alerts are something that you should add. Keep in mind, the quicker that you reply to the alert, the more likely it will not become a chargeback. So these services tell you that you have 24 hours. You have to keep in mind that the sooner you refund or you provide a resolution to that case or that alert, the better the outcome will be. So try to have somebody on these quickly. There are services and third parties where you can sign up to these types of alerts and they will auto refund or they will take care of these things quickly for you. Obviously, you have to, do an audit here and there and ensure that these things are getting done. But overall, you should definitely consider this if, let's say, you're at 0.6% chargebacks a month or more. Having the alerts will be an extra sense of security for your merchant account. There's a newer program that was launched by Visa. It's called VMPI. That was the old name. The new name is called Order Insights. These things change and rebrand often. So keep in mind, this is a Visa program, and this is directly the acquirer to Visa. So Visa gives these alerts directly. With Ethica and Verify, these are third-party companies that set up different relationships with different banks like Chase and BOA and so forth. And they do an integration in order to get an alert system. With VMPI, this is directly a card network tool. So Visa provides this directly. So you get a better coverage. It doesn't necessarily piggyback Ethica and Verify, but you could have, if you're using both these services, you can have some that are very, you could get an alert from both, basically. So unless you're in a very dire situation in terms of chargebacks, you shouldn't necessarily be using all these tools at the same time. It could get redundant. You could be adding a lot of cost. So it's a good idea to speak to either your merchant account provider or if you're working with a chargeback management company, to figure out which ones you should use and which ones you should test. If you're just starting out, VMPI is probably the way to go, to just add that and try to use that as much as possible. And then if your chargeback figures and your fraud kind of settle down, then you leave it at that. If you still see, you have a lot and there's nothing that you can do, then you might want to add Ethica and Verify or CDRN, as they call it now, in there as well. So these are, just as a quick summary, are just alerts that are telling you that there's a potential chargeback coming in. Again, most merchants just auto refund, but you can decide to dispute it, meaning like provide some evidence that the transaction did occur, and that can prevent the chargeback as well.
If you're interested in alert services for your business, get in touch with my team and we can set you up with alerts that truly prevent chargebacks before they turn into costly fees and damage your relationship with your payment processor. If you have any of your own tips for listeners about chargeback prevention, comment below. If you found value in this episode, then don't forget to like and subscribe for more.